So we're, as I say, going into chapter 8 of 1 Corinthians, and it's dealing with a subject of food offered to idols. What has that got to do with us today? Um, do we get terribly hung up and concerned about people eating food that are offered to idols? We may say, no, not really. No, that's none of our concern these days. But I think you'll find that in the way that Paul addresses this problem, he does give us an eternal message uh, that isn't restricted simply to the topic of food offered to idols, but concerning consciences, concerning our relationships with one another, concerning how we regard one another, fellow brothers and sisters in Jesus. I think there are many lessons for us to learn. But the key themes I've put up there of chapter 8 are the superiority of love over knowledge, the non-reality of idols versus the reality of God, the responsibility of the strong to care for the weak in conscience, and Christian freedom should be used with love, humility, and sensitivity to others. So let's look at the first part of the chapter, which is the first 6 verses that we have there. Now, concerning food sacrificed to idols, we know that all of us possesses knowledge. Knowledge puffs up, but love builds up. Anyone who claims to know something does not yet have the necessary knowledge, but anyone who loves God is known by him. Hence, as to the eating of food offered to idols, we know that no idol in the world really exists, and that there is no God but one. Indeed, even though there may be so-called gods in heaven or on earth, as in fact there are many gods and many lords, yet for us there is one God, the Father, from whom are all things, and for whom we exist, and one Lord, Jesus Christ, through whom are all things, and through whom we exist. Now, many people may not realize that in the ancient world, yes, um, many people may not realize that in the ancient worlds, the temples in the cities served a dual purpose, functioning both as places of worship and communal dining spots. Every town and every city, it seems, was adorned with numerous shrines dedicated to local deities, as well as revered gods like Apollo and Venus. And during Paul's era, the trend of honoring the Roman emperor and his family in these sacred spaces that really began to flourish. And then at the heart of temple activity was the practice of animal sacrifice. Worshippers would bring animals to be offered, and after the sacrifice, these animals would be cooked and shared among families as part of a sacred meal. Typically, the amount of meat prepared exceeded what the worshippers could consume themselves. And so this surplus created a unique opportunity for the community to invite others to partake in the food that had been dedicated to their divines. And this ritual not only strengthened familial bonds, but also fostered a sense of community, and indeed for many, a shared spirituality of sorts. But even that often failed to use up all the sacrificed meat. And as a result, temple officials would take the leftovers to the market, where they would be sold in the usual manner. In fact, most of the meat available for sale in a city like Corinth would have been offered in sacrifice. Now, for this reason, some Jews in the ancient world, especially in places where they couldn't procure their own butcher, chose to avoid eating meat altogether. They wanted to distance themselves from any involvement, however indirect, in the worship of idols and man-made gods and goddesses. They understood that there was only one true God, Yahweh, the Lord, the creator of the world, who had established a special covenant with Israel. They were reminded of this in their daily prayers, which included the declaration right at the moment they got up out of bed. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one, and you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, and mind. A prayer from Deuteronomy that was recited every morning by every Jew. So this situation then was bound to present significant challenges for the emerging Christian church, trying to navigate through this pagan world. However, it seems that an additional layer of complexity emerged. Certain teachers were proclaiming that Christians could freely eat meat offered in sacrifice, not just by purchasing it in the marketplace, but even by dining in the temples themselves. And if they too were participating in the worship of various gods and goddesses. To complicate this further, during this period, the spread of emperor worship throughout the Roman Empire granted Roman citizens in Corinth a unique right to partake in meals linked to the imperial feasts or the imperial festivals. Those who chose to abstain would inevitably draw attention, potentially leading to serious repercussions. So Paul, with great deliberation, as usual, addresses these issues, slowly building his case until he reaches the heart of the matter in the middle of chapter 10, some way off from where we are now. But along the way, he outlines vital principles of Christian living amid a pagan society before applying them to this specific dilemma. I think for most of us living in an increasingly secular world today, there is much we can learn from Paul's insights. And this initial discussion of his not only sets the stage for the ensuing arguments, but also sort of underscores the foundational truth that drives Paul's message, the profound reality of who God truly is. And this statement stands as one of Paul's most compelling reflections on an essential theme. So, the Corinthian teachers, as in the past, devised compelling slogans. Remember the slogans of previous chapters? And these slogans were to articulate their beliefs. And it's a practice that's continued on till this day. People think up slogans, little sound bites that get into people's heads and hopefully make the point that people are trying to persuade them of. But one such slogan, "We all have knowledge," asserts that every true Christian carries an inherent, profound understanding of the ultimate truth. Consequently, trivial matters like consuming food offered to idols hold no bearing in this intrinsic knowledge. Well, another notable slogan, "Idols are nothing in the world," emphasizes the reality that idols lack genuine existence, really creations of human imagination. Thus, engaging with their temples or partaking in sacrificial meat is really utterly insignificant. Furthermore, the third slogan, there is no God but one. I tend to think that would have been rooted in a Jewish perspective. Yet it also echoes a broader ancient wisdom that the beings that people worship as gods and goddesses are simply diverse manifestations of a single universal deity. This notion stands in stark contrast to Jewish beliefs, as the God of Israel is unequivocally distinguished from pagan deities, exposing them as dehumanizing illusions that detract from true understanding. So, Paul addresses these slogans with responses that are as thought-provoking and intricate as the statements themselves. Knowledge, you might ask, verses 1 through 3, it tends to inflate egos, a frequent criticism he levels at the Corinthian teachers. What is truly essential is not mere knowledge, but love, an idea that he will passionately develop. Guess where? Yes, in chapter 13. Furthermore, it's not about your understanding of various doctrines or even of God and the gods. What truly matters is God's awareness of you. You can recognize this divine connection by discovering the profound love you hold for this one true God within your heart and your mind. Now, this underscores a fundamental truth at the core of Paul's message. Christians are called to practice the essence of that ancient Jewish prayer, committing to love the one true God with all our being. And so in verses 5 and 6, Paul addresses the second and third slogans. While it may be argued that no idol possesses true existence, it's undeniable that a multitude of so-called gods and lords populate our world. Some reside in heaven as traditional deities, we think, while others manifest themselves on earth. In Paul's day, the imperial cult was a glaring example of those who were regarded as a manifestation of divine here on earth. But the Jewish tradition of monotheistic worship, which Christians fervently uphold, stands in stark contrast to all these false gods and lords, irrespective of their actual existence. It is a grave misconception to believe that being a monotheist automatically legitimizes any worship offered to imaginary deities. What I'm saying here is that true worship can only be directed to the one true God. The true God stands apart, and the Christian gospel powerfully illustrates just how distinct he is. As Paul proclaims, our God is the God of Abraham, of Isaac, and Jacob, the God revered in ancient Jewish prayers, and the God we are called to love deeply. Yet Paul reveals an extraordinary truth, This one true God is now to be known as our Father. And this one true Lord is recognized as Jesus the Messiah. So, in a remarkable revelation, within the very essence of this one God, we discover both the creator of the universe, the source of all existence to whom we owe our very lives, and the redeemer of humanity, Jesus, Israel's Messiah. He is the one through whom everything was brought into existence, echoing the Jewish understanding of wisdom. Through him, we are invited to become the people of God, embraced in a divine relationship that transforms and empowers our lives. I think that this insight that Paul tries to express here packs a very strong punch, especially when we consider the greater significance it held in Paul's time. Rather than merely offering the Corinthians a set of simplistic rules or a list of do's and don'ts to navigate the complexities of living as devoted followers of the true God in a world teeming with other deities, Paul urges them to engage in deep critical thinking. He challenges them to grapple with the essence of the true God and to truly comprehend, fully comprehend, what it means to love and serve Him. This, I've got down here, important task. That's an understatement, but this important task remains as vital today as it was in the first century, calling us, you and I, with our faith to engage at a deeper level. As we move into the second part of the chapter, in verses 7 through 13, it is not everyone, however, who has this knowledge. Since some have become so accustomed to idols until now, they still think of the food they eat and food offered to an idol, and their conscience, being weak, is defiled. Food will not bring us close to God. We are no worse off if we do not eat, and no better off if we do. But take care that this liberty of yours does not somehow become a stumbling block to the weak. For if others see you, who possesses knowledge, eating in the temple of an idol, might they not, since their conscience is weak, be encouraged to the point of eating food sacrificed to idols? So by your knowledge, the weak brother or sister for whom Christ died is destroyed. But when you thus sin against brothers and sisters and wound their conscience when it is weak, you sin against Christ. Therefore, if food is the cause of their falling, I will never eat meat, so that I may not cause one of them to fall. Number of points that Paul brings out here. One way of describing what Paul is talking about here is that he seems to perceive the conscience as a sort of internal compass that directs individuals in discerning right from wrong. However, much like a delicate compass, the human conscience is prone to malfunction. It can be swayed by external influences. It can be led astray. Moreover, It sometimes adopts inappropriate thinking patterns, blurring the line between mere social customs, such as the way things are done in specific towns, countries, or families, and they confuse that with the fundamental issues of morality. Yet Paul had years of pastoral experience, and he recognizes that while human consciences can indeed be misguided, they can also be retrained and re educated. Yet it seems he understands that this transformative process requires significant time and patience. In other words, simply urging individuals to abandon their deeply held beliefs in favor of new ideas is unlikely to yield lasting change. Even if they outwardly comply, their conscience, the very aspect that you seek to shift, will remain unsettled, signaling discomfort and urging them to question their new stance. Though Paul himself maintains a clear and an unwavering conscience regarding the consumption of meat, he appreciates that not all Christians share this conviction, and he acknowledges the complexity of their beliefs and the reality that it is unrealistic to expect a sort of overnight transformation in their understanding. The individual conscience is of paramount significance for Christians. It serves as a vital mechanism, though, through which each person assumes responsibility before God for their actions. Maintaining a clear conscience is essential to authentic Christian living. When one Christian behaves in a way that shocks or distresses another, or influences that person to act against their own conscience and their own convictions, they jeopardize that individual's sense of responsibility. And this can compel them to disregard what they genuinely believe to be God's will. My friends, in such moments, the stronger Christian, and I put that in inverted commas, risks leading the weaker Christian, again in inverted commas, into sin, potentially causing profound spiritual harm. It is crucial for all of us to acknowledge that when things have taken a troubling turn, and to strive for accountability in our interactions with others. And I can't emphasize enough the need to tread very, very carefully when dealing with another person's conscience. Now, don't get me wrong, this is not an excuse for individuals with very narrow views and underdeveloped consciences to hinder the rest of the church from engaging in activities that are harmless in nature. Frequently, those from, oh dear, how do I express it, restrictive backgrounds, burdened by rules that stray far from the essence of the gospel and are actually rooted in a specific social subculture, they attempt to force compliance from other faithful Christians to fit into their limited worldview. But in such instances, what we might call the rule-bound Christians are not in danger of compromising their consciences. They're not being led astray because they are certain of their own correctness. No, Paul confronts a fundamentally different challenge. He is addressing a situation where several Christians in Corinth, prior to their conversion, which let's remember was quite recent, had been regular participants in the worship of idols. They would have been intimately familiar with the dark allure of those practices, a gripping sense perhaps of mystery and fear. When they feasted at the false god's table, they believed they were consuming the very essence of that god, absorbing its life into their own. And this experience was often intertwined with the casting off of moral restraint, with boys and girls lurking in the shadows, ready to fulfill any desire for a small fee paid to the deity. Mhm. After being entrenched in that dark and potent world for many years, it's no wonder that they would struggle to disentangle their memories and imaginations from those experiences. Now, as now as new Christians, they felt they had been pulled from the depths of darkness into the vibrant light of faith. True worship is not defined by such practices, genuinely fulfilling human living that transcends all of that. They have escaped. They are truly free. But reflecting on the past, it becomes clear that the old world cannot be neatly divided into good and evil. You can't simply assert that one aspect was righteous while the other was sinful. What I'm saying is that the very scent of the meat you once savored in the temple, accompanied by the resonant chants of priests and the allure of drinks and prostitutes, would flood your memory. And it's entirely understandable that your conscience would struggle to grapple with any fragment of that former life without extensive teaching, prayer, and very wise guidance. And the struggle is especially pronounced when Christian friends who may not have experienced the same background find no fault in one particular aspect, the meat. Paul is profoundly concerned for these individuals. He genuinely wishes to safeguard their consciences and protect them from unnecessary turmoil. Indeed, Paul perceives all Christians as vital members of the Messiah, integral parts of the body through which the Messiah's essence is manifest in our world. He'll say more about this in chapter 12. Therefore, any attack on the conscience of a weak Christian, in essence, is an assault on the Messiah himself. There in verse 12. Earlier, he expressed that while knowledge can lead to arrogance, love is what truly strengthens and uplifts us. And it is this profound love that now serves as the foundation of his argument. You may possess the right to eat meat offered to idols. And he could be alluding to the privileges that Roman citizens in Corinth enjoyed at grand imperial celebrations. Yet it is imperative to exercise caution. Your right must never cause a weak brother or sister to stumble, to revert to their old ways. The notion of rights demands thoughtful reflection, and the clarity we seek is illuminated by the guiding light of love. In this light, we need to discern what our freedoms truly mean and ensure that they align with the call above all other calls to uplift one another. If our actions towards others, our disregard for other people's consciences is such that the very opposite occurs, then we are in very dangerous ground. We are responsible for one another. Going that extra mile, being patient to the point of waiting for someone to understand, perhaps, and appreciate the great liberties that we have in Christ. This is all our responsibilities to each other. And Paul says, instead of standing on our rights, let's find ways of uplifting each other that we might all stand on higher ground.